Hello, this is Amin, and you are watching session 16 of ASP.NET Core tutorial. In this session, we are going to talk about dependency injection and what is the benefit of using dependency injection in our ASP.NET Core MVC application. In previous session, we create one repository, iCast repository, and one implementation of that repository, which we called it static cast repository, which contain some static data, which imported in a static cast repository statically. If you look at cast controller, you can see it has dependency on iCast repository, and through constructor injection, we inject iCast repository to this controller. It means within the constructor, we create an instance of implementation of iCast repository to cast controller, and we can use that implementation throughout the cast controller. But in this project, we have just one implementation of iCast repository, and we have one interface, and may it not make sense why we use dependency injection, but in real world, we have several controller which use several different repository and interface, and that situation you can feel better what is the benefit of dependency injection in the large scale application. And for using dependency injection, we should register our service within configure services method in a startup class. The ASP.NET Core cannot realize that which implementation should use when we create an instance of my interface, and we should register this service within configure services inside a startup class, and we have done it in previous session. Let's flip to Visual Studio and talk more about dependency injection. This is the project that we have been working so far during this tutorial, and this is the controller that I have. You can see I inject iCast repository within cast controller using construct injection, but I can do it easily without a dependency injection, and just I should create a new instance of implementation that I have in my project. That's it, and my application will work without any error. But the issue of this implementation is when I use this repository in different controller and I want to change my implementation, and for test purpose or for changing the implementation of my interface, I should change this line of code within all the controller that I use. That's why it make my job easier if I use dependency injection and I just change changes in my startup class and in configure services. Also, we have some different method of adding services, AddSingleton, AddTransient, and AddScoped, and I will describe differences between these methods. But for now, let me show you how I can change the implementation with just one code. For this purpose, I copy this implementation that I have and I change its name to static2 cast repository, and I change the static record that I entered. If you look at the previous one, I just have 1, 2, and I did 3, and within this one I have ID 4, and I change this one to field, and in comments I write payment for field. And for changing the implementation, when I use dependency injection, I just need to change this line of code, and automatically when I change this line to the new implementation in all the controller that I use this interface, it's automatically create an instance of new implementation of interface. For proof this one, let me change this line of code a little bit, a string, and I receive ID from URL, and I use cost repository and get cost by ID and receive ID from input parameter, and I will show the category of the selected ID to the browser. Let's build the project and let's route to cost, controller, and detail action method. Now I have just ID4, and let's try to receive a category of ID4, and as you can see is fuel. For making sure that the previous implementation is not available anymore, I change it to 1 and try it, and you can see I don't have ID1 in my controller because the implementation is changed to new implementation that I created in this session, and that one is just have ID 4. Let's back to the project and let's change it to a static cost repository, which I created previous session, and run the project once more. And this time you can see I have ID 1, 2, 3, and this time I don't have ID number 4. And that's why I really easily, with use of dependency injection, change the implementation with just one line of code. But let's talk about a different method of adding services. I have AddSingleton. When you create a service and register a service with AddSingleton, it's created with the first request and it's available in entire life of web application. And it is just one time, as its name implies. You create an instance of that service once, and it's valid for whole entire life of your web application. And after that, I have AddTransient. If you add your services with AddTransient, the life of your service is for just that request. And for each request, the ASP.NET Core creates one instance of that service. AddTransient is good option for lightweight and stateless services. And for AddScoped, the instance of that service is created for whole entire life of that request, and for whole the request its service is available. That's it in this video, and thank you for watching us. Don't forget to subscribe our channel and click on the bell, and also follow us on our social network.